Hello my friends and welcome to 7 Revolting Let's Not Meet Stories from Reddit. In our lives we're going to meet some amazing people and make great memories with them. But we're also going to meet people we would never like to see ever again. Ever again. Here's 7 real Let's Not Meet stories from Reddit users. You know how you had one of those ideas or experiences as a kid, and then randomly you think about it when you're older and you interpret it completely differently? Well, I just remembered my earliest memory, and the situation is definitely not what I thought it was back then. When I was 2 years old or so, my parents did some work in the downtown area of my city, cleaning up one of the buildings after hours. When they couldn't find an overnight babysitter, they'd bring me with them. This particular night, for whatever reason, my parents, not the most responsible couple, left me in their car after work for a while. Probably forgot to lock up or something. They both went, so I'm just sitting alone in the car, chilling. Then I see my Uncle John come up to the car. Toddler me gets crazy happy because Uncle John is a really fun guy. He taps on the window and waves at me and points to the lock, trying to get me to pull it up and unlock the door for him. My dad took the keys with him, and the locks were manual. I was in the car seat, buckled up so tight that the lock was just barely out of my reach. Uncle John kept cooing at me to get the lock up, but my little toddler arms were too short, and I didn't know how to unhook my car seat straps. Eventually, he left. My parents came back, but I was asleep by then. That's the end of what I remember. But looking back, that definitely wasn't my Uncle John. He was living in a completely different state at that time, and he would have gotten my dad's keys if he had come to bring me inside. I probably just thought it was him because of his facial features. It was probably some creep trying to abduct me. I was a couple inches away from being one of those little girls that went missing. So, Uncle John, I hope you didn't meet any other little kids that night. Or ever. And parents, stop leaving your kids alone in cars. Reading these stories has spontaneously reminded me of my own creepy encounter. I'm pretty sure I intentionally bottled it up because it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. This will require a bit of setup, so I'll try my best to keep it short. I was 15 at the time and female, and so was my best friend Emily. Emily's mother worked 2 provinces away, and so Emily's cousin Eric was living with her. He was 28. I had a falling out with my own family, so I moved into the other bedroom in the house. Down the street lived a 31-year-old man named Justin. Him and Eric had a loose friendship, and Justin would sometimes be at the house smoking weed and hanging out. He would talk to Emily and I sometimes, but nothing gave us a bad vibe about him. Until one night. Eric had gone to a friend's house, so Emily and I were alone. We played some video games and went to bed around midnight to our separate bedrooms. At around 2 a.m., I slowly woke up, not realizing why. As I woke up, I became aware of someone touching my stomach near my breasts, and slowly turned around and saw his face. Justin was over my bed, caressing my stomach and just looking at me with a demented grin. When I saw him, I immediately screamed as loud as I could, and he ran out of my room and out of the house. Emily and I locked the doors, and after a couple hours, somehow managed to fall asleep again. However, at 5 a.m., I hear a blood-curdling scream coming from Emily's room. I ran into the hallway and passed Justin running to the front door. I lock it behind him and go into Emily's room, where she's in her bed shaking. She had woken up and Justin was in the corner of her room, just staring at her sleeping. We didn't sleep the rest of the night, and only when daylight came, we realized how he had gotten in both times. He had broken a window in the kitchen and had slid in. Being 15 at the time, we never called the police, but Eric went over to have a talk with him, and we never saw him at the house again. A few years later, since I'd long moved out of that house, I saw him walking down the street, and he immediately crossed the road without looking me in the eyes. Regardless of whether or not he feels ashamed, let's never meet again. My little sisters and I loved to play in our finished basement. My father laid carpet professionally and used it everywhere, even on parts of the walls. We spent hours playing the floor as lava, jumping from bar stools to a pool table to the wrap around the wall bench. We avoided the carpeted lump on the floor. I asked my mom many times what it was, and she never answered. As I got older, I thought the floor just rose at a point and the concrete started to crack under the carpet. I hated the other unfinished side of our basement where the washer and dryer was. It was nothing like the side my father finished so beautifully. He had a huge freezer that came with the house, and I was often asked to get the meat out for dinner that night. It was so scary and damp. I noticed that there was a toilet and sink in one of the rooms behind the washer one day when I felt especially brave. If I looked around too long, I would eventually get overwhelmed with anxiety and fear. The creepiest part about the room was the hole in the door, the cat door, so our cats could use the litter box in the unfinished part. The cats would run through that hole screeching every day. They hated that room too. If I looked at the dark hole in the wall too long, I felt like I would be sucked in. I saw red eyes in the hole staring back at me. I would look away terrified. When I looked back, they were gone, but I bolted up the stairs that the hole just happened to be right next to. I hated doing the basement chores, and so I'd sit on the carpet steps throwing a fit until my little sister came along. My sister was 5 and could hardly help. One time when I was rushing through my chores, I heard her talking. I looked up and she was in the old room with the crusty toilet and sink. She sounded like she was having a conversation, but I only heard her part. I told her to come with me and we're leaving. I was too afraid to ask her in that room. It went on that way for months. I thought she was playing with her doll. When I went down to get meat or fold clothes, I would rush back and not look at that side with the bathroom. I was too scared. As I was folding clothes one day, my little sister said, "Molly thinks you're really nice and pretty." I asked her who Molly was. "Molly lives in the basement. She's nice. She says she hurt her neck, though." The answer to this day scares me to death. I started asking my mom about the house. I told her I was scared. My mom just waved her hand and said, "All houses have their problems." My neighbor lady was like a second mom. I asked her about the house. I asked her for months, crying and pleading for her help. She handed me a newspaper article. A woman was strangled and thrown off a cliff in my town years ago. Several other women went missing and presumed dead by the hands of one man. He was in jail. My neighbor pointed to the address at the bottom. It was my house. She then told me how strange this man was. He would pull his van to the backyard and rip out and burn the carpet in his van every month or so. Her little daughter went over one night with some friends, and they looked in the garage. I saw women's clothes and life-size dolls hanging from the rafters with knives and red paint covering them. I hope it was red paint. She told her mother and they called the police. He was later arrested. My neighbor told me my mother was still afraid of him. Shortly after she bought the house, she got a letter from the murderer addressed to the new owner. He told them not to go poking around his house. He built the house, and he can get in any time he wants to. He has many friends that are not in jail. My mother begged my father to move, but my father would not be pushed out by some man in jail. He carpeted everything and went on with his life. The news article said the murderer may have found a way to store the bodies before they dumped him. I thought of the freezer. The victim's eyes were blood red due to the intensity of the strangulation. I refused to go downstairs after reading that without my mother. I still wonder what was under that lump. Our house was lost, so I'll never know. I never want to come across any of the friends of that murderer or the girl with the red eyes again. So my friend Amy was over visiting from the UK a few weeks back, and we decided to go shopping in the city for a day. Amy, bless her cotton socks, is always falling over and doing awkward and embarrassing things in public that draw a lot of attention. It's something I've gotten used to, and of course that day was no exception. We were on the train and Amy and I were trying to move from one carriage to another. Amy thought the carriage doors were automatic, and as one was closing, she put her arm through it and the door closed on her arm, to which she let out a loud scream and the entire train looked at us. I pressed the button and the doors opened. I was grateful to pass the next carriage as Amy had just made a spectacle of us. The next carriage was less full, and we both sat down. There was an older man in about his 50s sitting across from us. He was looking at Amy, rubbing her arm, and he asked if it was her that had let out the scream just before. Amy then began explaining that train doors in Europe were automatic and that her getting her arm caught was totally understandable. I always find her justifications for her many accidents quite funny. During this time, I was distracted by my phone and was busy texting, but I was listening intently and laughing to myself. The man then began asking what part of Europe she was from, where she was staying, etc. Basically making small talk. I just assumed he was a harmless and a bit lonely guy. Amy was being pretty forthcoming with answers too, but I wasn't worried. Then I looked up from my phone. Not only is Amy awkward and accident-prone, but she can also be very naive and oblivious. The man was wearing short shorts and was exposing himself intentionally, and he was erect. My mouth dropped to the floor. I couldn't believe it. There were plenty of people around. Surely someone wouldn't do that. But here he was. Because I had been looking at my phone, I hadn't seen the look on this guy's face either. It was very strange and hard to describe, but it was kind of a leering but smiling look. Amy was chatting away as though nothing was amiss, and I think that man was interpreting it incorrectly. I think he thought she was into it. Let me just also interject that Amy is very attractive and looks younger than she is. 23, but could easily pass as 15. The train stopped and I grabbed Amy and basically threw her off the train. I saw from the corner of my eye that the man was trying to follow us, but there was a crowd of people getting on that stop and we lost him easily. Amy was confused, but luckily followed my lead. I explained what I had seen and Amy almost died. She honestly had no idea. I often worry about Amy, especially when she travels alone. She's just too innocent and oblivious sometimes. Anyway, creepy middle-aged man on the train. Let's not meet again. One day when I was around 12 years old, I asked my mom if she had ever almost been kidnapped out of curiosity. This is the story she responded with. When my mom was about 5 or 6, she, her parents, and twin sister were staying at a very high-class hotel. Due to growing up in a wealthy family, they were staying in a resort type of place that was very expensive, so there were very few people there at the time. My mom was swimming outside the pool by herself, while my grandmother and grandfather were reading magazines and sunbathing. I don't recall if her sister was swimming or not, but I think she was. So my mom is just splashing around like her 5-year-old self. A man who was in the pool offers to teach her how to doggy paddle. Seems legit to her, so she lets this guy teach her how to doggy paddle and has a bit of fun doing it as well. After a while, he asks her if she wants to get a soda. She excitedly says yes, and he proceeds to pick her up and walk away with her. My grandmother notices and starts to scream, while my grandfather stands up and yells, "What are you doing with my daughter?" The man quickly puts my mom down and runs away. Later that night, my mom and her family are in their hotel room, getting ready to go out for dinner. There's a knock on the door, and my grandmother answers it. The same man from before is standing outside and asks, "Can JJ play?" My mom's name is Jean, and recalls him calling her by that very affectionate nickname. My grandmother hollers for my grandfather, who's already heard the conversation prior and was already on the phone with the front desk. The man books it down the hall before security is able to reach him. That night, my grandparents decided to stay in the hotel instead of going out for dinner, and ended up just watching TV. During a commercial, an ad for a loose criminal comes on the screen, and my mom points to the picture and says, "That's him!" The name on the screen was Daniel Barbosa. So 4 years ago, when I was 14 years old, I was in the Army Cadet program. We used to do FTXs, or field training exercises, every other month that basically taught us how to pitch a tent and survival stuff. It was pretty simple. I have a couple great stories of the FTXs, but this one by far is one of the weirdest and creepiest things that I've experienced. In the middle of October, we were on an FTX near a lake. We had 3 adult officers, 2 warrant officers, a high-ranking cadet, and a few sergeants. It was raining heavily, and the nights were wet and cold. Our tents were closely placed next to each other. My friend and I couldn't sleep because a group of cadets were at the campfire, when they were supposed to be in their tents, singing and being loud. Now, I was surprised that none of the officers could hear them, because believe me, we would be in it if the officers were in earshot. We used a buddy system whenever we went to use the portable washroom, so my friend and I went over to the portable and did our business. After we were done, we decided, hey, we can't sleep, so why not go hang out in that field over there? Needless to say, This is when stuff got weird. We meandered over to the middle of the field and just stood there, looking at the stars and talking. It had probably been about 5 minutes when we could see a truck coming down the road adjacent to the field we were in. The high beams were on and I could make out that it was a white pickup truck. Now here I am thinking, why the hell is there a truck out here in the middle of the night? We were out where no one could possibly be at midnight. There were no houses around that I knew of, so it just didn't make any sense. The truck stops for a minute and then starts driving again. A few minutes later, the truck has apparently done a loop somehow and is coming down the road again in the same direction. The truck comes to a stop at the same spot as last time. By this time, we could hear the sound of sirens going off nearby. A couple more minutes pass and the sound of something that may or may not have been gunshots ring out a couple times. I was skeptical, but it sounded very much like it. My friend and I are still standing in the middle of the field when I suddenly realize whoever this is could see our silhouettes since the moon lit up the trees behind us. Thinking quickly, I shush my friend and grab onto her shoulder, pushing her down to the ground as I let myself fall. "Don't make a sound," I whispered. "We're going to crawl to the end of the field. Once we're there, we're going to run to the camp as fast as we can." She protested, saying that the ground was too wet, but I just didn't know what that person in the truck wanted or would do if he knew that we were there. She ended up taking my lead and we made it back to the camp, safe and sound. We decided to stay in our tent for the rest of the night, and I didn't get any sleep at all because the other cadets stayed up the whole night singing at the campfire. The next morning we went to report it to one of the officers just in case. We then found out that there was a minimum security prison very near us, and that one of the inmates had escaped. My friend and I are pretty sure that that white pickup truck was looking for the guy. I know it's minimum security, but still, at 14, it was freaky. White pickup truck dude and inmate? Let's not meet. I recently replied to a post on Ask Reddit about scariest experiences. And after reading what I had to say, a couple people suggested I posted about it here, so here I am. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill to pick up a jar of ragu for my mom. On the way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign to leave me alone. Subtleties are not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chatting. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you?" "Of course. You're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you?" "That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then." "What's your name?" "You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office." "Do you like suckers?" Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward up the back steps and through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mom, who said maybe he was on his way home from work. But then the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home, and if I talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I need to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure. Could I be forgetting something? I told him no again, and he frowned, then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know. It turns out, that wasn't all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon neither my sister or I was allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first neither of us knew what he was saying. Then one night, one of my brothers told us that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me, and later my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but this was before there were any stalking laws, so there wasn't a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. My dad then called a friend from back in the day, who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came to a screeching halt. I couldn't walk to school alone, couldn't play outside, couldn't walk to Super America. That's sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time that he began threatening my sister as well. Then one afternoon, my sister, 2 of my brothers, my mom, and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage. They'd seen him too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where they lost him in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple weeks later, we woke up to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd, born the same day as I. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was him and ruled it as accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was at home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He would also talk about the house itself, about the window in the kitchen that he could easily open with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked, and about the French doors that connected to the living room to the side porch, and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go out for a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at the Saints West roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with their best friend. My little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo in the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly, the top of the French doors swung inward, and in a few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see a silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television and we ran upstairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep in the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light. This way we could see outside. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept back down the hall to our brother's bedroom to look. We looked down and we could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza for delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring that she wasn't stupid, and she could see that he didn't have a pizza, and she was calling the cops. He left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened, and they walked around the yard watching for him. They came back in, and things settled down. By now, we'd pretty much given up on calling the cops because it never helped, so we just went back in. Each of us, except my youngest brother, still asleep, carrying a knife from the kitchen, just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know the sensation that you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway, into the dining room, at the windows, but he didn't see anything. But he could still feel eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try to get a better look. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the window of the door. It had 3 rows of 3 windows, so he still couldn't really see. He stepped closer, then closer still, until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There, on the other side of the window pane, was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but they didn't find him. The next night we were at the table playing Crazy Eights. My brothers were restless. My sister asked him what's wrong. He said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom, boom, boom on the door or window. Almost immediately after he finished the sentence, boom, boom, boom on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the 2 eldest ran out, but he was already gone. A couple weeks later, I was at the school and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down and saw that now too familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name, and I ran to the teacher to tell her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mom. That same day, my mom had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up. as he'd called to say that he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table, a gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. He was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something bad was going to happen while he was gone. I sat with him for a while, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events and many more took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, everything. For a long time, during and after the Dr. Ramsey days, I would have a reoccurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I found out years later that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsey would tell my parents that he was going to rape and kill me, and later my sister, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen that one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. Note, the author has started a GoFundMe to make this story into an entire book. The link for that funding is in the description below, so if you want to hear more about Dr. Ramsey, go help her out by donating a bit to her cause. Thank you. All of these stories were taken from a thread on Reddit. If you'd like to read them or other stories, the link is in the description below. That's all the time I have for today, my friends. I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening. I'm Imori. Now listen to the spooky tunes. Recently replied to a post on the Axe Reddit, y'all.